We're going to be rendering some rabbit tallow today. It's leaf fat that I've been collecting over the past year or so from meat rabbits. The way we're going to render this tallow today is the same process that you can use for beef tallow, pig lard, or whatever type of fat that you may have. So this is chilled. This rabbit fat is chilled. I just took it out of the fridge, and we're going to be putting it into the food processor, and we're going to try to process it up, because the greater, like the finer it is, the more we want a greater surface area so that it will melt more and we'll have a higher yield. So without further ado, let's get this started. Alright, so I've processed all this rabbit fat, and it's kind of like a really awful texture, kind of like over-processed chicken salad sandwiches, but just pure fat. So right now I have 3 pounds and 2 ounces of rabbit fat. I wanted to weigh it because not all of this is going to end up as tallow and usable. The rendering process is what cleans up the fat and separates the fat from like any other, the junk, the protein, and any other molecules that aren't fat. So that's what we're going to do. There's different ways to process lard and tallow. If I had a bigger batch, I normally put it in my roaster, my electric roaster, which I then put in the garage, and I turn it on its lowest heat setting, which I believe is 180 degrees, and just kind of let it melt for a day. But because this is a small batch, it's only, like I said, 3 pounds, we're going to be putting it in the oven. I am preheating the oven to 170 degrees, and we're going to go ahead and cover it up and put it in. I also want to clarify that we're dry rendering today as opposed to wet rendering, which you add water to it. But I prefer dry rendering. It's much easier. So we're just putting the processed fat, and we're going to be melting it. And you didn't have to process it. You could always like chop it up fine and small. That would also work. But we have the oven is at 170. And we're going to be covering it up and putting it in the oven. It's been about 45 minutes that it's been in the oven, and you can see it is starting to melt. You can see how soft it is. Alright, I think this is done. You can see it's melted. And it's been about 2.5 hours, and the only reason why I'm going to stop doing it is because I need my oven to cook supper. So we're going to go ahead and strain it, and I'll show you how I do that for the small batches. Okay, we're going to strain it. This is how I strain my small batter fats and stocks and everything I make. I have my scale here because I want to be measuring how much tallow that I end up with. So I'm going to zero it in with all this equipment on it, but I just have a regular glass bowl. I have a strainer thingy here. And on top of that strainer, I'm going to put a flour sack cloth. You could also use cheesecloth, which is a little coarser, but I prefer a very fine weave. It really is much more effective, I find it, resulting in a cleaner tallow or lard. So I've got that all set up, and now I'm just gonna carefully just pour it in. Oh, that's hot. And you know what, I forgot to turn the scale on, but I'll measure it later. Now I'm just gonna let it strain through. And you can even speed up the process if you're kind of in a rush or being kind of crazy. gather up all the edges, pick it up, and you can even squeeze it. That's why I put on my glove, so I could give it a little squeeze. You just sort of help the squeeze out the fat. I know when you're making like jams and jellies, or technically, or even like doing lard, you're not supposed to squeeze it out because you could be squeezing out some of the impurities. But my flour cloth is fine enough that I'm not really worried. Okay. Now I want to show you what the leftovers look like. Okay, so here I have my filtered rabbit tallow. We're going to put that in a canning jar, and again I'll weigh it. And then this is what the crackling looks like. Now if I had cooked it longer, this would be darker and crunchier. Some people like to fry it up and stick it on their salads, but I think this will be going to the dog. When you're rendering this rabbit tallow, it hardly smells at all. Like sometimes when you render beef tallow, it's really stinky, and that's why I generally do it in the garage. But with the rabbit, it hardly smells at all, and it actually just smells like a pleasant sort of chicken baking. So it's not a bad smell to have in the kitchen. All right, I zeroed out my scale. I just want to weigh this. Okay, so I've just measured this out, and I have just over 2 pounds and 2 ounces, 2 pounds and 3 ounces, which is about a 67% yield, which is not that great. I think I might try melting this down more and maybe getting a little bit more out of it. We'll see. But that's the process. It's a pretty basic, simple process for rendering, and I hope you're brave enough to give it a try and try to get the best quality tallow or lard you can get and have fun. So this is going to go to making probably soap. Who knows, I might get brave and try to make like a whipped butter for personal use. We'll see.